want to know what you're fighting for. Podcast for George. 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 Oh, yeah.
Well, hello, hi, how are you? Happy New Year, folks. That's the String Prophets. I've been playing them throughout the holiday season. The great Bob Pace, whose music you hear on the show all the time. And Catherine Severing Fox, they're on the fiddle, on the violin. She's been on the show several times before. And you can go to String Prophets on Facebook. You can order that album. I mean, it's great. It's a little melancholy sounding, but I know it's kind of a melancholy time of year for me. It's, a time for remembering and looking forward. But I got to tell you, folks, I've seen a lot to look forward to. As a matter of fact, here, I'll put this up on the screen. This is what I posted on Twitter not too long ago. Stand by for another trip around the sun in the spaceship Nostromo. And people look at that. Well, what the hell's Nostromo, folks? Well, I got a picture of her crew here. Let me see if I can get this up on the screen, and this will jog your memory a little bit. Let's see. I got to find this. Here we go. This is the crew of the Nostromo. Recognize that, folks? That's off the movie Alien. And my God, what a grim, dark, what a great movie that is. One of the things I like to tell people is when I saw that in 1979, when that came out, I thought, my God, what a movie. Think of what's going to happen. Think of what movies are going to become in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. But you know what? They haven't really become much, in my opinion. You can't hardly capitalize on that thing for the genre. For what it is. But I want to get to our show here. I want to get to our guest because we're always running out of time when we have her on because she's just great, folks. This is one of my favorites, and it's a great way to start the year. Coming on the podcast by George Liveline again is Laura Belin from Bleeding Heartland. Folks, Bleeding Heartland is a community blog providing original reporting and commentary about Iowa politics, especially campaigns and elections, state government, social and environmental issues. We're hopefully going to be talking about all of those things today. Bleeding Heartland also covers what the Iowans in Congress are up to. I know we're going to be talking about that and any federal, state, or local policies of interest to Iowa readers. Laura Belin has been the site's primary author and sole editor since early 2008. Recognized nationwide as an authority on Iowa politics, the legislature, the judiciary, and of course, the governor's office, which seems like always trying to block her reporting. Maybe we'll talk about that. Laura Belin is a true muckraker, folks. She's rooting out details our elected officials would prefer remain out of view, and they try to do that by stonewalling her public records requests. And of course, new in, I think, late 2021. And this year, of course, you want to catch her on a regular basis weekly. She is on KHOI Community Radio in Ames. That's 89.1 FM, where she regularly appears on the program Capital Week. So, okay, that's the intro, but I love reading those things. Let's get her up on the screen. Take this thing down, click this button here, and say, come on, Happy New Year to Laura Belin. Hi, Laura.
Happy New Year, George. Thank you. And I wanted to mention that KHOI live streams all the programs.
Yeah.
And also I have a Substack newsletter where I send out the audio files and recaps of every show if people are interested in listening to Capital Week, but they don't live in the Ames listening area. So it's been really fun working with Dennis Hart. He's a great partner for the show.
Yeah, you know what I'll say about KHOI, that program, and your participation in a couple of things. And I've said this before on the show. Laura Belin, to me, is as accomplished a broadcaster as she is a print journalist. You're really good on that. And one other thing about it, that show, I think, is only half an hour long. Am I correct?
Right.
Yeah, the topics that you guys cover, the number of topics, and in the way that you cover them is really stellar. We kind of do the long form here on my show, but I mean, you really get a lot in just a half hour on Capital Week.
Yeah, we try to move it right along. And one thing I enjoy about the show is that we're able to talk about a lot of political stories that I didn't have time to write. I mean, on any given day at Bleeding Heartland, I try to publish something new just about every day. But if I have 5 or 6 newsworthy stories I'm looking at, I probably only have time to write one of them or maybe 2. But on Capitol Week, Dennis and I can discuss a lot of the stories that I wasn't able to cover in more depth on my website. So it's been really enjoyable. We're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the show.
All right, that's great. And here on this show, my big three, Laura knows this, is always climate, war, and healthcare. And it's got me kind of depressed and a little bit grouchy here looking ahead to 2023 because I'm really not seeing much good on the horizon here. And I don't know, I talked at the beginning here, Laura, about, Nostromo. Maybe we're not quite, running around a spaceship dodging alien monsters at this point. But just generally here, before we get going, what's your take? Are you as depressed and agitated, maybe even as angry as I am, or do you kind of take this all a little bit more in context?
Well, I have to tell you, I think a lot of people find the holiday season to be a little bit melancholy. I mean, there's this atmosphere of enforced merriment. And so if things aren't going well, or if you're down about anything happening in your life or in the world, it can almost be magnified, I think, during the holiday season. But I agree. I mean, I kind of joke sometimes that my role over at Bleeding Heartland is documenting the atrocities. And we now have larger Republican legislative majorities than we've ever had since I've been doing the website, and really in decades. Our governor is chairing a national organization and is ever that much more motivated. We've got a new Republican attorney general and state treasurer coming in. And so I don't expect to have a lot of good news to report in 2023, but I'm just going to try to stay on top of it the best I can.
Well, we're going to see red. There's no doubt about it. Let's get this up on screen here because I use this to promote the show. It's just a little bit of what's going on, but this was on Bleeding Heartland, and it's a great article. I encourage people to go to bleedingheartland.com as always and check this. It's free. This Feenstra guy, his stance on earmarks cost his district millions. I'll read a little bit of this, and then I'll have Laura explain it. The omnibus budget bill Congress just approved will fund dozens of infrastructure projects or services in Iowa during the current fiscal year, which ends on September 30th of 2023, the new year here. But none of those earmarks, totaling tens of millions of dollars, will benefit communities or facilities in the 4th Congressional District of Iowa. What? How come?
That's because a huge part of Iowa is covering really the entire northwest quadrant and stretching all the way down to Story County and quite a bit ways east. And now his new district is also going to include the Council Bluffs area. And it is a lot of money that they're missing out on.
Well, okay, so to get us started here, this omnibus bill, now there's a lot of criticism of it, and I can hear some of that too. It's Congress kind of throwing everything into this big pork barrel at the end of the season, and everybody gets something. But like you said, the 4th district isn't going to get it. And the insult of the injury here, this is the district that had Stephen King, right? And they got rid of that guy, and then they got this guy. And I look at this, and this is my number one thing all the time: is what a Momo. Is this guy too dumb, or is he in on it? Well, he didn't do this by accident. He did this by design, right, Laura?
I mean, let's be real. There was a lot of waste in the budget, and one of the issues with the omnibus bill that I didn't go into in that post, but the Republicans in the U.S. Senate had a lot of leverage because a Republican majority is about to come in the U.S. House. And so Democrats gave a lot of ground in the Senate. That's why the Senate Republicans agreed to go along with this. And they massively increased the defense budget. I mean, the Biden administration wanted to increase the defense budget by billions. And then what the bill does, increased it by maybe 40 or 45 billion on top of even what the Biden administration wanted. It's practically half of our discretionary spending is the defense budget. And it's really, I think that side of it kind of is a scandal. But of course, for Republicans like Randy Feenstra, that's not the wasteful spending that they object to. He voted for the defense authorization bill that talked about that level of spending on defense. It's the domestic projects. And I know that a lot of people, when I published that, I heard from some people that said, earmarks are bad. I mean, kudos to him for being consistent. Earmarks are really wasteful. But the Democratic majority in the House, when they brought back earmarks in 2021, they really reformed the process to eliminate or massively reduce the amount of corruption that was possible because, for instance, all of the members of Congress have to post on their websites everything they requested funding for. They have to sign letters certifying that they and their families don't have any financial interest in any of these projects, and they have to provide a pretty detailed justification and the overall bucket of money that can go for these earmarked infrastructure service projects is no more than 1% of the budget. So it's really not the waste, fraud, and abuse that sometimes happened in the past. You may remember a scandal in Illinois where Dennis Hastert approved funding for something that would elevate the value of property he and his family owned. That kind of thing, I really think that they've eliminated in this. And when you look at the projects, I mean, I might not agree with all of the projects, but many of them are going to be very worthwhile things that will benefit communities. Childcare programs in several small towns in the 3rd district where Cindy Axne was not reelected, and road work, bridge work to repair deficient bridges, some waterways to repair pipes that are in terrible shape. I mean, there are important infrastructure projects, and I'm sure I know that there are many cities and towns in the 4th district that can use that kind of help. In fact, Tom Cullen of the Storm Lake Times wrote to me after I published that piece, and he flagged in the Storm Lake area, the Buena Vista supervisors. I mean, there's some very important road project that they've had to delay now for yet another year because Feenstra didn't request any money for it.
So are they going to be able to backdoor that somehow? Is he going to be able to scramble and still get something accomplished for his constituents up there? Or are they just out of luck?
Well, some of the money, I mean, the Congress approved and Biden signed a big infrastructure bill in 2021, and that is going to fund projects everywhere in all districts, regardless of whether somebody voted for it or not. So there will be, and of course, there are lots of programs, federal government programs that Congress doesn't need to reauthorize every year. So Social Security, farm subsidies, veterans benefits, people who live in the 4th district get those just the same as anybody else. But the difference is that these infrastructure projects, when they're prioritizing which highways to rebuild and which water facilities, sewage, storms, water issues to deal with, they're going to go with the ones that were earmarked. Those will be first in line. And the earmarked money, as I mentioned, this is a pot of money that was approved to go into this budget. And so if some member of Congress didn't ask for any of that, his district isn't going to get any of that. There will still be some infrastructure projects happening over the next few years in the 4th district, but it's a lot of money that he left on the table there. I mean, compared to Ashley Hinson and Marinette Miller Meeks, who voted, you could say in some ways that their position is more hypocritical, right? Because they voted against the budget bill, they blasted the Biden administration's reckless spending, but then they put in for all these tens of millions of dollars of projects that are going to be happening in their districts.
I want to bring this back up on screen here because of Laura's writings. I want to read through this very quickly, and then I've got some things I added to it, and it's going to bring out the lefty in me, folks, so stand by here. Feenstra voted against the non-defense portion. Now, Laura mentioned that. He voted against the non-defense portion of the fiscal year 2022 omnibus, containing most of the domestic discretionary spending, as well as most earmarks. He was also a no on the bipartisan infrastructure bill and this week's omnibus, which is denounced as a monstrosity full of reckless spending and government waste. Okay, now this is from Politico. I want to talk about waste here. I want to talk about this National Defense Authorization Act. It's now approaching $1 trillion each year, annually renewable. This is out of Politico. This is what they say about the NDAA. The final bill authorizes $847 billion in national defense spending, $45 billion more than Biden sought. Okay, now think about Feenstra there. Who's his mortal enemy on the planet? Who would he like to wrestle in the mud into submission? Probably Joe Biden. He goes running to vote for this, folks. The Pentagon receives $817 billion of that, while $30 billion would go toward nuclear weapons development overseen by the Energy Department. The total comes to $858 billion when factoring in accounts that don't normally fall under the Armed Service Committee's jurisdiction. Now, remember what I said about fraud and waste and that type of thing? And Feenstra, man, he's all up about that. This is from the Great Lee Camp. I had this on my show with Matthew Ho the other day. I'm bringing this back. I want to read this a little bit. I want to get Laura's reaction to it, and then we'll move on. But the Pentagon admits they can't account for half their assets amid latest audit failure. This is what Feenstra is voting for and he's voting against the domestic programs for his district. Lee says the Pentagon, the U.S. Defense Department, was just audited for the 5th time, and they just announced they failed for the 5th time. That's not accountability. I don't know what is. When I say they failed the audit, Lee says, I don't mean they put a 9 instead of a 7 on one of the balance sheets, causing 2 soldiers to get accidentally left in Antarctica, freezing their asses off. I mean, they really failed their audit. As The Hill put it, the Defense Department has failed its 5th ever audit, unable to account for more than half of its assets. But hold up. Did you catch that? They can't account for over half their assets. This is the largest murder machine on the planet. Nearly $1 trillion spent every year, and they don't know where half their shit is. How is this not criminal? Criminal, yeah.
I have not served in the military, and I do want to say that in that defense budget, some of the spending increases, they raise the salaries for people in both civilian as well as military jobs. And I mean, that's valid. Those people are suffering from inflation just like everybody else. But if you've ever talked to anybody who was a career military person or worked in a civilian role at the Pentagon, they will tell you, I have universally heard that there is so much waste in the defense budget. And sometimes sometimes the military even wants to cut certain weapons programs or close certain bases, and members of Congress don't want to do it because it's like a jobs program for their district. You may remember in the 1990s, there was it took years to negotiate closing a series of military bases because that was so hard to ever get a bill like that through Congress, even when the Pentagon admitted they don't need that money. They don't need as much of that equipment. They don't need that kind of airplane, that it's operationally not even that useful for them. And yet it's like a jobs program. It would be more efficient for the federal government to just hand out money, right? Just like a basic living allowance or continuing the child tax credit. That would have much more social utility than some of the wasteful defense spending. But of course, very few members of Congress want to be on the hook for voting against a defense budget. And this was always one of my beefs with Dave Loebsack, who I like. He did a lot of great things when he was in Congress, but he got elected talking about how he had opposed the Iraq war. But then when he was there, he voted for every military budget. He voted against a lot of the amendments that were offered that would have reduced the waste and the spending. He voted for things like more surplus military equipment to police departments. I mean, it's like once they get into Congress, it's this machine of massive military spending just sucks most of them in.
I just had the great Matthew Ho on my show, and he put it all in context. I'll never forget this. He said, based on military spending and taxation, the equivalent of half your taxes. Now, again, the modern monetary theory people will tell you that your taxes aren't actually used that way. Okay, so that's a debate for another day. But he says half of it goes to this military spending, and then half of that goes to Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, to the military contractors. And again, this is this revolving door of money that Laura's kind of getting to here with domestic jobs and that type of thing. My God, half my money, 52%, is going to military spending, and then half of that is going to the merchants of death, as Brad Wolf from the peace organization out in Pennsylvania. That's how he describes it. The merchants of death, 25% of that. So
I mean, it's sort of, this isn't exactly accurate, but a good shorthand way to think about the federal budget is about 2/3 of the money goes toward what are called these mandatory programs, the ones that don't have to be reauthorized every year. So Social Security, Medicare, like I said, veterans benefits, farm subsidies, things like that. And then about 1/3 of the budget goes to this discretionary spending that Congress has to approve. And it's about half of that that's going to defense. So, I mean, that's a lot when you think about all the other domestic spending needs that we have as a country. And then for half of it to be going to defense when our defense budget is so much more than many other countries combined.
Let's I want to keep moving along here because, as I mentioned, we got a lot of topics to cover.
We do.
That's one, definitely, and that ain't funny. This almost was thought to be funny by some people, but I had this on the show again with Matthew Ho, and I don't think this is funny, Laura. And you've got some particular insight on this because of your covering of the Iowa governor and her relationship and affinity for other Republican governors, and I think she's the head of the governor's conference thing now or whatever. This is in South Dakota. I think you posted this on Twitter. I saw a lot of stuff about, I mean, this is shocking and illustrative of the militarism of America, also the kiddified nature of how we've come to believe that these guns and toys and explosives and fireworks and ATVs and motorcycles and all this shit is all lumped together. And here's the governor of South Dakota, this gnome up there. Talk about this, Laura.
Well, Kim Reynolds, our governor, she doesn't like to be upstaged by people. And so when I saw this news about the governor gnome of South Dakota getting this flamethrower and posting a video of herself having a great time lighting some refuse on fire, I just thought, what is Kim Reynolds going to do to try to pose with some impressive looking weaponry? It just seemed like something, because it's often she has seemed to respond to what other states were first to ban transgender girls from participating in sports and so on. She has often followed the leader. And as you mentioned, she is the incoming chair of the Republican Governors Association. And Republicans just had a pretty bad string of governor's elections in 2022. Really, only Nevada was good for them. They lost a lot of races that they felt that they should have won. But 2023, timing is everything. The three elections that are coming up this year, when Kim Reynolds is going to be the chair, are all on much more favorable turf for Republicans: Mississippi, Louisiana, and Kentucky. So, and the governor's longtime chief of staff, Sarah Craig Gongol, is going to be the new executive director of the Republican Governors Association. But yeah, there is something odd about the way Republican politicians fetishize these weapons of war, really military grade weapons. And I noticed that in Christmas cards, sometimes you see people posting on Twitter the Christmas cards that members of Congress send out, some of them posing, and even with their children posing with these military style weapons.
Oh, there she is in her full camo. I guess that's her husband there or whatever. And I also pointed out, you know, I bitch about farmers a lot on the show. Farming is completely different than when I was a kid. Farmers were struggling back then. All the farmers, or most of the farmers, were small farmers. It's not the case now. The corporate farmers, you have a lot of hobby farmers, which is what this looks like to me. They've got that little John Deere end loader tractor there that's worthless on anything but a hobby farm. They're Morton building with a big American flag back there. And one of my main complaints about farmers is they seem incapable of understanding that and they talk about pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and all that type of stuff, particularly in a red state like this. They get this by birthright. They get the land given to them. They get this head start. And it's like they cannot see, if you grew up in a shotgun shack down in, you know, Mississippi someplace, and you can't get an interview for a job anywhere other than in a fast food restaurant, how insulting this is to look at that and look at people playing games with a flamethrower on what appears to be a hobby farm.
Well, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, because that's something I've pointed out as well in the context of when Republicans were complaining about the student loan debt relief and so on. I mean, the farmers are about 40% of farm income just comes from the federal government through subsidies. Their crop insurance is supported, is subsidized. And again, this isn't like people scrimped and saved for years to be able to buy a farm. This is just something they were born into. In most cases, it's very difficult for somebody to break into farming if the land wasn't already in their family. And so, and yet many times the people in the farm communities are the most grudging toward any kind of support for other people, whether it is welfare programs or, in this case, student loan debt relief. Like, why should we help those people? Well, the federal taxpayers, including many of them in blue states, give a lot of money to support the work of farmers who inherited that wealth.
Yeah, and then Donald Trump, after the tariffs, slopped the farmers like nobody has ever had. I mean, the record subsidies and support for the farmers. These people and the corporations, again, I'll talk about them, because there are still some small farmers that don't fit into this category. But folks, right now they're vacationing down at the Gulf of Mexico, to quote the great John Mellencamp.
To be clear, I think that there's a strong case that the federal government should be involved in supporting farming. I mean, it is a critically important sector, but right now, the way the federal government is spending the money, it's not that efficient, and it doesn't promote the kind of farming practices that we really need to preserve the soil and improve the water quality. So, I mean, that's one of the issues with it. Philosophically, I don't have a problem with supporting farming, but at all. And I know that a lot of farmers do struggle to get by, but right now, our tax dollars are going toward farming practices that are detrimental to a lot of other people.
Well, let's bring this next one up. And the topic of the show seems to be momos. And this to me, and again, Laura would never say this, but here's another momo as far as I'm concerned. Miller Meeks used proxy voting 5 times after railing against the policy. This. God, did they not think that people are listening to what they're saying and doing? Talk about this one, Laura.
Well, it's funny that 2022 for some reason was a big year for me in reporting on Marionette Miller Meeks. I mean, she kind of keeps a lower profile in some ways than Ashley Hinson, who is considered the rising star in Iowa and may be in Republican leadership before too long. But this was funny because Marionette Miller Meeks she's a doctor by training, an ophthalmologist, and a former director of the Iowa Department of Public Health when Terry Branstad was governor. And so during the pandemic, she used her medical background a lot in televised interviews and public statements about the pandemic, saying, I'm a public health person and we need to follow the science. And oddly, she came out against mask mandates. She's been very skeptical of vaccinating children for COVID-19, but she is skeptical about really almost any kind of COVID mitigation. So she is vaccinated herself, and she did encourage Iowans to get vaccinated in 2021 when they became widely available in the spring. And then immediately she started saying, look, now if you're vaccinated, act like you're vaccinated. Don't wear a mask. And the House need to stop these mandates. They need to end proxy voting, which allows people to designate a colleague to vote on their behalf. And it's true, I think, that some members of Congress were abusing that proxy voting. They weren't really using it for pandemic-related reasons like it was supposed to. But anyway, she and many other Republicans said the House rules need to change and end this thing. But the other Republicans from Iowa, Ashley Hinson and Randy Feenstra, they were critical of proxy voting, and they never used proxy voting. But Marionette Miller Meeks, at least 5 times, she did sign letters saying that she wanted colleagues to vote for her. In some cases, those were on very important bills. And she didn't really explain why she couldn't be there. I mean, the letter she signed had this boilerplate language that said, I'm unable to be physically present in the House chamber due to the ongoing public health emergency. And it really wasn't pandemic related at all.
Well, here we are in the new year, looking ahead, looking back, and there's been a lot of this. But when I look at that, it strikes me and reminds me of this guy. Representative-elect George Santos admits to lying about everything. And even since this article came out, this guy, this lack of, this flat ass lying in full view. I mean, they're not stabbing you in the back. They're stabbing you in the front. There seems to be more of this all the time. Is there just more reporting, more coverage, more awareness of it, Laura? Or is this talking out of both sides of your face type of thing becoming more prevalent among our elected representatives?
This George Santos thing I think it's as much a media failure as anything else. I mean, this is ridiculous that all these lies weren't reported on.
Yes.
I know that the Democratic opponent, they had an opposition research document that they sent out to the media, but nobody was really covering it before the election. And so it didn't get to people. And now the Republicans, I think if they had a larger majority in the House, they'd like to be rid of this guy. But unfortunately for them, they really need the votes. They can't afford to they can't afford to lose more than 4 or 5 people on anything that comes to the floor. And so if this guy gets chucked out of Congress, it's very likely that his district will elect a Democrat. And it's because, it was an upset for him to even win. And I think that was maybe part of the reason why he didn't get more scrutiny, that he was seen as a non-viable candidate. But I do think that there's just more. Donald Trump brought in this attitude of flouting norms and breaking whatever rules you can get away with and just not worrying about being a hypocrite about things. And earlier in December, I wrote about, again, Marionette Miller Meeks, but this was just amazing to me. She registered to vote at her friend's house. I was annoyed with myself that I didn't request her voter registration records. I just assumed that she rented an apartment somewhere in her new district. But Pat Reinert of Iowa Starting Line broke the news in early December that no, she changed her registration and voted from a house where State Senator Chris Knoyer lives. Marionette Miller Meeks doesn't live there. There's been no evidence presented that she actually lives there. And that was incredible to me. Why? She's a well-off person. She could just rent a cheap apartment somewhere. But there's something about flouting the norms now that I do think it's related to the Trumpification of politics.
I will say this. I agree with you. I mean, Captain Butt Crunch, as I call him, is I'm no fan of Donald Trump, but I had this on my last show too. Joe Biden in 1988 had to drop out of that election after being found to be a plagiarist, not once, but twice, I think. And he also lied about his resume when it came to his academic credentials. So, to my Republican friends, yeah, I get it. I mean, it goes back a ways, but we need to, I mean, all we can do is act to start holding these people accountable. And my main criticism of Joe Biden, and I don't know if Laura shares this or not, but to me, he was the primary promoter and supporter of the Iraq War. And I believe, was fought under a false pretense, unknown false pretense, with those weapons of mass destruction. And we turned right around and plucked that guy out of the Senate, put him in the Obama administration, and elected him president of the United States. And he's about, it looks to me like, to run again. So it's
I
on
think
both sides of the ledger. Yeah.
he's definitely running again. I mean, I guess a lot of complaints about Joe Biden. If we're going back into his history, I mean, he
Ah,
botched the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, and we're still dealing
yes.
with this complete ideologue on the Supreme Court now. But and also the crime bill. I mean, there were some good things in the 1994 crime bill, like the Violence Against Women's Act, but it did accelerate the mass incarceration. And that is not a good thing. I mean, Joe Biden just issued a few pardons and orders of clemency, but just a
I saw that.
handful. I mean, we're talking there are hundreds and hundreds of people who probably deserve clemency just as much as the half a dozen he just pardoned. So yeah, it is a bipartisan thing, but I think that the brazenness of it is new. I mean, it used to be that people had to end their political careers over infractions that were much smaller than people can just ride out nowadays. And I don't even know Scott County, which is where Davenport and the Quad Cities are, that is controlled by Republicans. There's a Republican county attorney coming in, and I don't even expect any kind of serious investigation about whether Marinette Miller Meeks lives at the address where she's registered to vote. I mean, I feel like if a Democrat registered to vote, if I just registered at my friend's house in another county and cast a ballot there, I think that is basically voter fraud. I mean, or it's certainly voter registration fraud.
No, they won't do anything. It reminds me, I post this all the time, pisses people off on Twitter and Facebook and that type of thing. The latest revelations on Donald Trump, and everybody's been saying for years that the walls are closing in. I keep telling people these are the slowest closing walls in the history of walls, folks. I mean, honest to God, and that's probably what's going to happen out there in Davenport as well. Nothing. All right, let me bring this up on screen because this is something that's going to be big news in 2023. Again, it's interesting in this Democratic versus Republican dynamic in the state of Iowa. Some strange bedfellows here, Laura. The GOP leaders in deep red Iowa counties object to CO2 pipelines. And what's interesting to me, the Democrats and the lefties like me object to them because we look at it as a Rube Goldberg enterprise that's just going to make millionaires more millions, and it isn't going to work. So why do it? But they're kind of looking on it as an eminent domain, a feudal system rights type of thing. But regardless, you've got both sides now coming on board opposed to these things.
This is going to be an interesting fault line. I'm watching for this during the next legislative session because, as I mentioned, the Republicans have really large majorities in the Iowa House and Senate. But these pipelines are extremely unpopular in rural Iowa. And I have to give a lot of credit to the Food and Water Watch, Sierra Club, Iowa Citizens for Community Improvement. They have been doing a tremendous amount of organizing in rural Iowa and really working, like you said, strange bedfellows. I mean, working with people who probably don't support any of their policy agenda on anything else. But this is one where, again, like I oppose the carbon pipelines because it's a false climate solution. Yes. I think that the CO2 is going to end up being used in North Dakota for fracking. I mean, there are all kinds of environmental problems with it. But on the Republican side, you have dozens of Republican-controlled county boards of supervisors in Iowa have objected to this because of what they view as the impact on farmland. Owners are going to be dispossessed of their land for a project that really has no public value. It's just going to enrich some very well-off people and companies. And I mean, some of this letter, the reason why I wrote about this, usually it's such a slow week, right, between Christmas and New Year's, but this was just published on December 29th. And I thought it was huge news because this isn't a government body like a county board of supervisors filing an objection, which has been happening all over Republican rural Iowa. But this is an actual Republican party organization. And these guys are kind of out there. I mean, Hancock County Republicans, they recently they adopted a censure motion condemning Joni Ernst for voting for marriage equality for LGBTQ people. I mean, they are hardcore, right? I don't have common cause with them on many things, but they're very upset about these pipelines. And I think that there are going to be some Republican legislators representing some of these areas. I don't know about the person in Hancock, but many of them are going to demand some kind of restriction on eminent domain. And because they're upset about yields, they saw what happened on the farmland that the Dakota Access Pipeline went through a few years ago. It never recovered in terms of yields. There are all kinds of drainage problems. And some of what was in that letter might sound kind of silly, like they were complaining, but carbon dioxide, it's in short supply. We can't always get
Yes.
carbonated beverages. And why are we doing this? But
Yes.
you know what?
Yeah.
I mean, I am all for people forming alliances where possible. And it kind of reminded me of what the solar power incentives, that one of the strangest alliances I've seen in the Iowa legislature in recent years is between the Iowa pork producers and all the environmental groups. They disagree with each other on everything related to water quality, but the pork producers really like getting those tax breaks and helping that the CAFOs are very energy intensive. And so getting a tax break to go put solar panels on those CAFOs, they love that. So they were an important lobbying force. And I mean, let's get real. In a Republican controlled legislature, who is going to be more influential in getting a bill through? That's probably the Iowa pork producers.
Yeah, and the Iowa voters support it and vote for it because they want to eat pig guts. Literally, that's what bacon is, folks. Okay, I want to bring this back on screen here because there was one element of this that I thought was really interesting. Let me see if I can get it. You touched on this a little bit, but when this issue first came down, Laura, I said, well, okay, Summit's involved in this. This Bruce Rastetter guy, this friend of the governor's involved in this. This is where the cynicism took over for me. I looked at that. I said, these are going to happen. These pipelines are going to happen. This is how the world works. The golden rule is going to prevail here. Those that have the gold are going to rule, and these pipelines are going to prevail. And I don't think there's any way to tell at this point, but are you as cynical about it as I am?
I think so, but I would say in 2021, the governor created what she called a carbon sequestration task force. And it was kind of comical because everybody on the task force, she's co-chairing it. The Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, Mike Nag, is a co-chair. A bunch of people from these companies, including a very senior Summit executive, a guy who works closely with Bruce Rastetter, nobody from the environmental community, right? So nobody who's actually worked on climate change issues was invited to be on this task force. It was just a bunch of people, the ethanol industry representatives, economic development types. And so I thought, yeah, this is a done deal, right? Because what Bruce Rastetter wants, no one's going to get in his way. But the politics of this have gotten more interesting now. There are 3 companies that are trying to build a pipeline across Iowa. And it's one thing for Republicans to oppose, like Pat Grassley, the House Speaker. He wrote to the Iowa Utilities Board to object to a waiver request from one of the other companies, which is proposing to build a pipeline right through Butler County, his home area. But the Summit pipeline is the one I think where that if any of them are approved, it's probably going to be that one. But now, this is a really big issue because Republican legislators are hearing from people back home. The Republican county supervisors are very concerned that these pipelines, they're going to harm farmland. They're going to be burdensome from an emergency services perspective. And if there's some kind of catastrophe, lives could be lost and they don't have the resources in rural areas to deal with it. These companies aren't going to pony up the money for it. So I would say compared to a year ago, I am less certain now that these pipelines are going to happen. I mean, I still think they're going to happen. And one unfortunate aspect of the Inflation Reduction Act, which had a lot of good things when it passed in August, but it did incentivize some of these carbon sequestration projects. And a lot of them, I think, are boondoggles. I mean, in theory, sequestering carbon is a great idea, but a lot of these things, the climate benefits of it have not been proven at all.
Well, and I've on a previous show, I likened it again to Rube Goldberg, and people went, well, who is Rube Goldberg? Okay, well, think about the Bugs Bunny cartoons, the Warner Brother cartoons of our youth. When they used to take a factory that would take a tree and make a toothpick out of a tree. That's what Rube Goldberg is, with all these contraptions and swinging trapezes and balls that come down chutes and all this crazy stuff. And I wished I had that graphic, but I don't. But that's the great Rube Goldberg. Well, again, this is kind of our New Year's celebration. I want to bring this up on screen because it's reflective of what our demographic is thinking anyway, Laura. The most popular, most viewed Bleeding Heartland posts of 2022. And again, I want to encourage everybody to go to bleedingheartland.com. Check it out. It's free, it's online. And then I'll put the Patreon addresses and that type of thing where you can support Laura's work. But it was a very active year. And analytics are very revealing as to what people are most interested in. What did you find out in this, Laura?
Well, I've been doing this exercise since 2016, and it's so interesting because sometimes I can predict. Now, I know by now that public education is always such a hot topic for my readers. And so there are always several posts dealing. And this year, with the governor's voucher plan, was such a major controversy during the legislative session. So several of the posts did have to do with public education. I was a little surprised by how many of the posts were related to Iowa Supreme Court rulings. I mean, people are upset. I feel like the work of the Iowa courts doesn't always get a lot of attention, but it does affect people's lives. And so several of those pieces were on the list. And some of them were just a piece that I did on the media. Usually something that I write about the media ends up being one of the most viewed posts of the year. And in that case, for this year, it was a scoop in November about how Gannett was using the Des Moines Register's plant to print a bunch of political mailings in Illinois that were styled as newspapers. So fake newspapers that were actually political mailings designed to attack Democratic candidates and support Republican candidates. And here the Des Moines Register's plant is printing this material. So that was.
Did you ever hear from them? Did any of your friends at Gannett come back to you
Well,
on that?
yeah, the Gannett Corporate Communications really clammed up on that. So I'm still pursuing a couple of angles related to that story, but so far haven't made any headway. And I think, and Gannett just announced another round of layoffs and furloughs. So,
Yes.
I mean, tough times, right? And so these contracts, I am not surprised that they don't turn down commercial printing clients. I mean, practically anybody who walks in the door. But as Dan Frumkin noted in that piece that I wrote in November, I mean, these fake newspapers are really damaging to the credibility of the legitimate media.
Yeah, I wished I had. We actually had some of the front covers. They're very deceptive. Again,
Yeah,
the thing
and
I hate.
this is one thing I'm trying to find out. That I actually have it here because I thought you might want
Yeah.
to think about it. This fake newspaper. So this went to thousands of households in Iowa in October, and it was boilerplate. It was very similar to newspapers that had been sent out in other states, and it was not printed at the Des Moines Register plant. But one of the things I'm trying to find out is whether it was printed at a different Gannett facility in another state, and I have not been able to confirm that yet.
And it preys on the most vulnerable, just looking at that headline with the Catholic thing in it. I mean, the people that are the most devout, maybe at the end of their lives, maybe they're most fearful. I mean, it really targets them. I mean, it's just a disgusting rag. And I could see why people would, want to look at that and read about it on Bleeding Heartland. What else? Any other surprises in your
Oh,
analytics?
yeah. Well, I was very surprised. I got a tip on a Friday night about the DNR director, Department of Natural Resources, who
Yeah.
was cited for fishing without a license. And I guess I was surprised even that she responded so quickly. And then it got shared on all these hunting boards that I don't participate in. So in addition to Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and the usual places where people share my work, but that was just really interesting to me. I didn't expect that piece to take off. That was very short. There was also another piece about many of the pieces. I would say the majority of them were related to Governor Kim Reynolds or the work of the legislature. And that's typical for me. I usually get a little bit of a bump in traffic during the legislative session because so much is going on and they are considering so many outrageous things almost on a weekly basis. That's the challenge is always figuring out what wacky thing to write about out of the State House.
As we wrap up here, looking ahead, Laura is all things Iowa, obviously, and we've got our own issues, particularly when it comes to the big three: climate, war, and healthcare, the things that I'm always concerned about. There's my little graphic that I show all the time on the show. Laura, I don't know, as you look out and about, how do you feel about, you know, okay, let me play this. This is really, again, this is what I am most concerned about right now, because I talk about the 2020 world. We could be dead in 20 years from climate change, maybe less from what I'm seeing. I think we're going to wake up one day and go, uh-oh, or we could be dead in 20 minutes because of nuclear war, because of all this warmongering that's going on right now. Let me play this video. This is really illustrative of what I'm most concerned about. Okay, so that's from the Bulletin of
Yeah.
Scientific, and yeah, that was a year or two ago. It's maybe even closer right now. Man,
I
we are
mean,
on the precipice.
the Iowa political establishment just doesn't do anything real about climate change. I mean, they like to do things that create the appearance of doing something about climate change. So in 2022, there was a bill passed supporting the ethanol industry and sales of E15 gasoline. That's not going to do anything. I mean, ethanol, long term, ethanol is on the way out anyway, but we're just going to spend a lot of money propping up the ethanol industry for basically no climate benefit. I mean, now we're learning that when you consider all the inputs that go into corn farming and everything else related to ethanol production, it really isn't even a net gain for greenhouse gas emissions at all. So, and I mean, Iowa doesn't have very many defense businesses compared to a lot of other states. So but the healthcare I'm very concerned about. And one of the posts that was among my most viewed for the year related to cuts in food assistance. I mean, I'm really worried. Iowa, we are sitting on this huge budget surplus, but we have a lot of food insecurity. We just turned down federal money that could have supported affordable childcare. Housing continues to be an issue, although the governor has used some of that Biden American Rescue Plan money for housing. I mean, there's still a shortage of affordable housing. And so it is really concerning going into this year.
All right, good. We're running out of time here. I wanted to make sure that I
It
got
goes
that in there.
fast.
Because, yeah, climate war and healthcare, folks. I got just in this past couple of years, I came to the understanding or realization. I got two friends that are dead and in the ground. They had access to healthcare. They didn't have it. That's why they're dead. And we're never going to get Medicare for all. And Iowans are never going to vote for it because we're an insurance capital. We're deeply vested in this. When it comes to this agriculture situation with the poisoning of the groundwater and the horrible impact that these CAFOs have on carbon emissions and stuff in the atmosphere and all that type of thing. It kind of always boils down to me, Laura, to this parochialism when it comes to politics. These politicians prostrate themselves during their campaigns, and I kind of get that to a certain extent, to get elected, about doing what's best for their constituents, and the rest of the country, the rest of the world be damned. And I mean, we're getting poisoned. We're dying out here, but they're helping their constituents. And in Iowa, that happens to be, the big ag and the big insurance and that type of thing. And they don't seem to be able to look up and get the bigger picture and do anything on those topics. Do you ever think of it in those terms,
I
local
mean,
versus worldwide?
well, there's just a real failure of political will. If you think about, and we're old enough to remember the ozone hole scare of the 1980s, and the government actually did something to regulate those CFCs, and it largely solved the problem of the ozone layer. But we just haven't had the will. Partly, I think it's because the fossil fuels industry has spent billions of dollars on fueling a climate denial. And it started with there really isn't climate change. Then it moved to, well, climate is changing all the time, but it's not because of human activity. And then it gets to the point, well, it's too late for us to do anything about it anyway. And you just want to make life too expensive. So, I mean, we collectively, the American political establishment has put our heads in the sand about climate change. And I just don't think, sometimes some people are optimistic that there's going to be some big technological fix that's going to make things a lot better. But I just don't see any way to turn this ship around on the greenhouse gas emissions.
Speaking of the ship, the Nostromo, remember how I
Yeah,
started here? I kind of feel like we're going to take
I
another
I saw
revolution
that
around the.
movie. I did forget that it was called the Nostromo.
Yeah. Oh my God.
It's a classic.
Yeah. So, oh, that's great. Give us a wrap here. I'm going to go ahead and close up shop here. Our first episode of the new year. I hope things get bigger and better and brighter, and we have some good stuff to talk about. But it doesn't appear to be so right now, Laura. Kind of
I've
give
got a
us a
lot in
wrap
the
here.
works. Yep, the legislature is coming back a week from Monday. I have some state government reporting in the works. We've got, again, as I mentioned, Brenna Bird coming in as Attorney General, Robbie Smith coming in as State Treasurer. I'm going to be watching to see what kind of changes they make. Brenna Bird's campaign was largely funded by the Republican Attorney Generals Association, which gets a lot of corporate money. And so I expect that the consumer protection is going to be scaled way back. And the AG's office is probably going to be more lenient toward corporations, but I'll be watching to see if that happens.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to take it out. I'm going to wish you a happy new year here. We'll have
Thank
Laura on a
you.
lot, folks, because I mean, she is one of my most favorite guests, and she is a muckraker. That's what I refer to her as. She's in there rooting out these details, and she's doing it on her own a lot of times, and she can use your support. So go to bleedingheartland.com. Go to that Patreon address that I put up here. Let me put this up again, and you can, you can support. There you go,
And
the
people, yeah,
Patreon. Yeah.
people can contact me if they don't want to use Patreon. There's a direct page where people can give using a credit card. I have PayPal, Venmo. Some people send a personal check. So I have a Substack now if that's more convenient for people. But I do appreciate the support. It does help me keep my editorial independence. And when I keep reading of layoffs at the big news companies, I'm just grateful to have the independent platform that I have.
Oh, that's great. All the best, Laura. Happy New
Thank
Year.
you. Happy New Year, George.
We'll talk soon, folks. And I'm going to go ahead and mention this. Now, there's Laura's information there for the Patreon. But if you want to support podcastbygeorge.com, I'm not doing the kind of work Laura does, so I don't need the kind of financial support or help that she needs. You can just go to podcastbygeorge.com and sign up, folks, free on Facebook or YouTube or any of the audio platforms there, and watch this, and then you'll learn about what Laura's doing and some of these other guests, because my show really is all about the guests. It ain't about me. And if you like Podcast by George, do it. Sign up. I'm going to take us out here. I'm going to play here. I'm going to just play I'm going to play the string profits here and play a little bit of that Auld Lang Syne as make sure that I've got that off the screen. Make sure that I'll take me off, and I'll play this, and then I'll wish you all a happy new year and say that's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.